Turn down the lights because it's time to embrace the grimdark darkness that is today's mad musings, Dark Heresy. This is the 40k RPG that started it all. Dark Heresy presented the best of Warhammer 40k and the worst of it. It's renowned for having a fantastic setting, though the rules were often suspect. This is the game that launched 4 sequel games and expanded the 40k canon in ways that were never explored before. The game became a collector's item in its own right. I'm Mr. Welch, and today we're hunting heretics, xenos, and traitors with Dark Heresy. The game started in 2008 under the Black Library line for Games Workshop, making it one of the few RPGs Games Workshop ever printed. The Black Library line only lasted a few books before being transferred to Fantasy Flight Games, where they reprinted the original books and began expanding the line with books focusing on the numerous aspects of the 40k universe. Fantasy Flight later revised the game in a second edition, which greatly cleaned up a lot of the rules, but also reset the game from the Calixis sector to the Ascalon sector. Unfortunately, Fantasy Flight lost the license a few years back, and Dark Heresy has become the equivalent of gaming Archaeotech. The game mechanics are largely percentile-based and quite deadly. I mean, don't get attached to your character deadly. Dark Heresy quickly joined the ranks of Call of Cthulhu and Paranoia with its lethality, as players got a small amount of hit points that never really increased by any great number, and then get sent against some of the deadliest creatures the 40k universe has to offer. Most guns above lasgun are instant death, and even medium-tier bad guys like Gene Stealers can result in total party wipes. Fortunately, character generation isn't that hard. The first edition set of rules was a level class system, with each level opening up new abilities and skills for purchase as you went up. Actual increases in character stats are few and far between, and they only go up between 5 and 10% as an increase. As most tasks inflict a penalty on success, you're not going to succeed at much for a very long time. There are various classes available in the game, including guardsmen, psychers, assassins, clerics, scum, tech priests, enforcers, and a few more. The Sisters of Battle got added early on with the Inquisitor's Handbook, but the rules for them were so badly written you had to wait for Blood of the Martyrs to come out to actually get a playable version. The beauty of Dark Heresy, and the number one reason it became an instant classic, is the deep delve into the background of the 40k universe. It's always been hinted on how bad it was with the various games, but it was normally just restricted to a glimpse of the battlefield of 40k or the warring gangers in Necromunda, and showed that life in the 40k universe was just as bleak on a day-to-day level. It wove tales of worlds like the mining world, where any attempt to improve your status or wealth was considered a sin and a crime. There's a system devoted to storing data files on the brink of a civil war because they're running out of room. There's a rogue black sun that appears randomly across the sector and drives entire planets into madness. And that's just a small sampling of the literally dozens of worlds. Corruption is everywhere. Xenos are infiltrating the nobility. Chaos cults are corrupting the downtrodden. And the ecclesiarchy and the mechanicus are trying to gain power over the sector. That's where you come in. The party serves as a bunch of underlings to an inquisitor, whose role in the campaign can vary from barely there to father figure. Most of the missions are simple orders from the Inquisitor to go to X planet, investigate bad stuff, shoot bad stuff when discovered, hope that bad stuff dies when you shoot it. From there, the party can investigate how they see fit, though making themselves too obvious draws unwanted attention. Disguising your identity too much, you can bring down the wrath of the powers that be for poking around in places you shouldn't be. It's a balancing act on how to approach the investigation. The party is very low-powered, by far the weakest of any of the player characters from the 40k games. Deathwatch, you're genetically engineered space marines. As in Rogue Trader, you command entire armies. Black Crusade, you can get powers of the Dark God. And in Only War, there's always the option of calling in artillery. In Dark Heresy, you're pretty much a private investigator with a pistol, hunting down things that can turn you inside out if you're lucky. Oh, and First Edition made you keep track of your money, and Inquisitors don't pay crap, so stick with las pistols because a full magazine for a plasma gun is about 6 months' pay for an Imperial Guardsman, assuming you can afford a plasma gun. The amount of source books for Dark Heresy was substantial, though the quality varies greatly. The Lathe Worlds gave an excellent look into not just 1 but 3 Forge Worlds, and how people are little more than tools to the Adeptus Mechanicus. Ascension, on the other hand, is the epic-level source book, and it's widely considered the worst book in the entire line because of its broken mechanics, limited character options, and uneven advances, considering the high level of play involved. For example, an assassin can become a Vindicar, which can solo Space Marine squads, while the Scummer class, no matter which class options are taken, are restricted to just Gunslinger, which makes them better with just pistols. But the quality of the books are superb, and the writing inside is worth the price. Second edition Dark Heresy fixed a lot of the problems first edition had, at least rules-wise, but it did get rid of a lot of the character options and reduced the massive Calixis setting to the much smaller and less defined Ascalon sector. The rules also embraced the only war mechanics, which moved away from the level system. Instead, it gives characters proficiencies in various skill classes determined by their starting choices. The more these proficiency choices overlap for skills and advantages, the bigger the discount becomes to buy those skills and advantages. The skill list was greatly reduced from its bloated form, and advantages were also revised to be more useful and less numerous. It's largely seen as a better system, but an inferior setting. If the edition had more time to put out books anywhere near the quantity of first edition, that attitude might have changed, but it wasn't going to be. The amount of detail in first edition was staggering. The Inquisitor's Handbook was notorious for just listing tremendous amounts of different guns, even if they were just variants of different rifles and pistols. But every weapon pattern had a history, and that history reflected on the gun's mechanics. There was a crank-operated heavy stubber that you could identify its owner because he was the guy with the one arm more muscular than the other. There's a one-shot dueling las pistol that was completely impractical outside of dueling. Every piece of gear gets a name and a history. Imperial worlds are all presented as disturbing in their own right, where human life is a commodity to be spent rather than to be protected. I would be remiss if I didn't mention how neither of the systems did psychics justice. First edition was ridiculously punitive, with any roll of a 9 to test your powers causing a psychic feedback. This could be anything from an unsettling feeling falling on the party to a demon eating the psyker, like what happened to my second group psyker on the very first roll of the dice when he tried to use his divination ability to see which door we should take. It was only during his second character did he realize you could burn fate points to avoid instant death, so remember to read all your abilities before you start playing. The second edition only caused psychic events if you rolled doubles on your test, but more importantly, it allowed low-level powers to be used without the chance of getting eaten by a demon. But since you could spend a fate to re-roll a die, it made veteran psychers practically immune to psychic backlash. Of course, if you really wanted to see why people in Dark Heresy groups hate psychers, check out page 80 of the Inquisitor's Handbook. For the veteran players watching this channel, you already know which one I'm talking about. The Templar Calyx of the Scholastica Psychana, or call them what they really are. They're Jedi. Jedi! You lose the cheaper intelligence cost for a much cheaper weapon skill advantage is a disadvantage, but since willpower is the defining trait for psychers, it's a small cost. And since the advance is first available only at level 4, just buy all 4 available intelligence boosts by level 3, and there's no penalty at all. Then you get all the cool psychic powers and all the cool melee advantages and skills. Then take your force sword and backflip all over the damned Imperium with your psychic powers, chopping up heretics in such a laughable fashion that you make half the party feel inadequate. Remember that if you ask to play a Templar Calyx and your game master is well within his rights to laugh hysterically at your request, then take a few minutes to compose himself, and then completely break into uncontrolled laughter again. You're more likely to be allowed to play Rey What's-Her-Name from The Last Jedi than a Templar Calyx. Though at least the Templar Calyx has a believable backstory. Now comes the painful part, buying the game. Because the books are very high demand and writing is considered top-notch for the most part, the books are in demand. Let me preface that. The source books are in demand. The adventures you can get for list price or less. The second edition stuff has greatly increased in value, often in triple digits. You can get lucky on eBay for a chunk of them, but books like The Lathe World or Book of the Martyrs aren't going to be cheap. If you want just the background to read, try to get Disciples of the Dark God or Creatures Anathema for new background on different foes. Granted, with people desperate for cash right now, it is a buyer's market, assuming you're not stuck in your house unable to work like a lot of people selling stuff online right now. So that's Dark Heresy. It was a trendsetter of a game. It gave 40k players the stuff they couldn't get enough of. It had an interesting mechanic that caught your eye long enough to put a bolt shell through it. The mechanics might have been questionable, but the setting drew you in and engulfed you into just the depressing universe that was 40k. Many of the players didn't switch the settings from first to second edition. They still played in the Calixis sector. And with the next 40k RPG game, Wrath and Glory, turning out to be an embarrassing disaster on launch, people didn't switch to the new game. If you love 40k, you've probably already got the set. If you like the 40k universe, you can start grabbing the books. Cubicle 7 has the full set in PDF on their website. For physical copies, eBay is flooded with them right now. Get ready to blast off in the grim, darkest sandbox you've ever had the luxury of playing. It's time for the 40k RPG Rogue Trader. Wasn't kidding about this being a sandbox. This is the sandiest of sandboxes, because the basic plot is to fly around and explore a cursed region of space and colonize, exploit, and pillage whatever you find. Politically correct, this game is not. When I say luxury, this is the game where you are playing an obscenely rich space noble, complete with your own starship, army, tacit approval from the Imperium of Man to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before, and strip mine everything you come across for profit. The principle of the game is you serve on a rogue trader's starship, and more than likely one of the players is the rogue trader. In the 40k universe, contacts with aliens is forbidden, and exploration and research into new locations and technologies is considered heresy. However, a certain type of noble, obviously enough called the Rogue Trader, is given permission to deal with the filthy xenos, explore territories outside the Imperium, and bring back lost technologies. Because of these permissions, Rogue Traders are fantastically wealthy with few exceptions. You start the game with a ship and a profit factor. The better the ship you start with, the less your starting profit factor, and vice versa. Ships have a rating called ship points, and transports average around 30 ship points, and grand cruisers around 70 or more. Your starting profit factor is 100 minus the ship points you spent. There's a few exceptions, but those are for in the more advanced rules. This game's campaigns will live and die in session 0. It's a total sandbox, and the possibilities in the game are limitless. If you want to hire a bunch of mercenary armies and go around carving out a mini empire, there's nothing stopping you. If you want to spend your starting wealth on kitting out a fast and stealthy ship and go spying and exploring and selling all of your data to the highest bidder, that's not for everybody, but my campaign had a blast. You can spread religion, go pirating, fight the filthy xenos, go on treasure hunts, or if you just want to go completely off the rails, actually just trade with people and make money off of that. Find out what your players want before you roll a single die. The campaign you make is going to affect what ship they're going to start with, so if they want to go full-on warmongers, they aren't going to start with a single transport with their one lonely gun. Most games will start with a frigate that's not too expensive but can hold its own in most fights. Cruisers will leave you very little in the way of wealth, and transports can't fight worth a damn. Once the party decides who's the rogue trader, and there are a few other options, but it's standard just to have one rogue trader in the party, the rest of the party fills out the crew. It's a class level system, though not as strict as most games, with the same character mechanics. The rogue trader leads the ship and is heavy on leadership skills, and obviously the rogue traders are no slouch in combat either. Then you got the arch militants for the trigger happy crowd. Seneschals handle all the money aspects of the game. Void masters run the ship. Explorators are the tech priests and handle all the repairs and upgrades. Missionaries are priests, which are important to the game because it is set in a theocracy. You got two psychic types, which are the astropath, a blind telepath that serves as the typical 40k style psyker, as well as the ship's radio. And there's a navigator, a three-eyed mutant that is not only accepted in the mutant-hating 40k universe, but heavily rewarded because there's no ways to fly between stars without them. In later expansions, you can play orcs and Kroot, and in one PDF, there's official rules for the Tau. And with one adventure, they give you rules for playing Dark Eldar. Not regular Eldar, Dark Eldar, the ones that are a little too rapey and tortury for most people. Rogue traders in the 40k power base sit comfortably at number 2, only behind the Space Marines of Deathwatch. Compared to the original game of Dark Heresy, where players had to scrounge money to reload their weapons, rogue traders don't even understand the word shortage. Rogue traders start around level 5 compared to the Dark Heresy peons. Your characters in Rogue Trader have the greatest superpower of all, vast wealth. Your characters are starting with weapons that the acolytes of Dark Heresy and the grunts of Only War only dream of. Best quality weapons are the norm for the officers of a Rogue Trader vessel. Every piece of gear you acquire for yourself is almost always the highest quality available, and you can get it whenever you want it. When it comes to outfitting yourself, the question is, can I afford it? The question is, how many can I afford? Mechanically, the game is a percentile-based system, the same system created by Dark Heresy with a few modifications. You roll your basic traits, modify them with a background creation system that is heavily reminiscent of Plinko. Then you get your skills. There's 3 levels of skills. The first one removes the penalty for doing something unskilled with it. The next 2 increase the chance by 10% each. You can also increase your stats up to 4 times each, with each increase raising the stat 5%. You don't level up quickly in Rogue Trader. Your stats will usually end up in the 30 to 50 percentile chance, so you don't succeed on average tasks with any regularity. You do need to get better gear, which is the whole point of the game. The Plinko creation system was a neat concept, but it was a bit stifling because it did remove character options as written. kept some backgrounds from getting certain roles. The concept was simple enough. You made your selection for your background. Your next option could only be from the 2 to 3 choices beneath it. So if your character came from a Forge world run by the Adeptus Mechanicus, your life options were restricted to a Scrape Garys, a Stubjack, or a Child of the Creed. If you wanted your character to become a scavenger or steal the tech you were working on, that was outside your selection options, so you couldn't do it. Because you only ever had a few options to choose from, and the chart wasn't very large, the 2 options on the corners could never meet the options at the far corner on the bottom. A rugged survivor from the death world of Catachan could never become a rogue trader without bending the rules, despite the fluff saying anybody could become a rogue trader. The Catachan couldn't even become a mercenary, he was restricted to criminal or scavenger. On the flip side, a noble never had a chance to become an astropath, even though anybody with psychic powers was taken away and assigned their roles in the psychers, bypassing all other options. So once your party is ready and the crew is filled out from the rogue trader all the way down to the rat catcher, it's time to set sail across the void. Because this is a spacefaring game, there's a lot of rules about how ships work. You get to build your ship, which starts off as a basic frame, and you add the parts to it. You get to fill out the basic parts, and the mainline parts fortunately don't cost anything to add. You still want your basic Geller field to keep out demons. That costs power and space, but not ship points. Then you have to add your plasma engine, your warp engine, your sensors, your life support, your power source. Once all of that's taken care of, you get to add weapons and additional ship locations. If you want a garden, it will cost you ship points, but it also raises morale. If you want to add a section to the ship designed to impress filthy xenos, you get a bonus when negotiating with them, but then the ship's morale takes a hit because the rogue trader tolerates filthy xenos. Keep in mind in this game, ship travel is extremely hazardous. If you're going to go to faster than light, you literally take a shortcut through hell. Go watch Event Horizon for an example of how that works. The ship has a force field called a Geller field, which keeps it from being possessed and overrun by demons, where the navigator can actually see through the warp safely, which would drive anybody else insane, and can pilot the ship safely through the warp. In theory, a lot of ships are destroyed because they get lost in the warp, and sometimes the warp will screw with time, so you actually come out weeks later than you were supposed to arrive. On rare occasions, you can actually arrive before you left. Then you get to the fun part of adding guns. Every ship has a certain number of weapons it can fit in its hull, as well as set directions and size restrictions. You aren't going to fit a micro-cannon broadside onto a destroyer escort. A lowly transport gets a single gun mounted on its top side, where a grand cruiser is bristling with every weapon you can imagine. There's a lot of trade-off in the weapons. Energy weapons deal a lot more damage, but cost a lot more power. Laser weapons have a further range than plasma weapons, but plasma inflicts enormous damage to compensate. There's a lot of factors to consider when arming your ship. Range, power consumption, and total damage and space all factor into what's the best gun for you. If your ship allows it, you're going to want to vary your guns, because the first thing you have to do to damage an enemy ship is to lower its shields. The shields stop the first hit a turn for most ships. Certain ships have multiple shields and can ignore more hits. So a single macro cannon shot drops a shield exactly as a lance battery shot. Wasting highly damaging lance shots on shields is a good way to lose a fight. You want to use your smaller guns to disable the ships and hammer them with the big ones. In the basic book, you pound on each other until someone is dead in space or enough losses among the crew are inflicted so the ship breaks and runs. Expansion books add attack craft and torpedoes to increase the tactics available to ships, so instead of just parking across from each other and slugging it out. Now giant vortex missiles that will snap a ship in half in a single hit will encourage you to move around in space as not to die. Certain crew actions give some variety in combat, from damage control to concentrated fire to increased movement, so there's always something for everybody when trying not to get vaporized by plasma bolts the size of Bane blades. Rogue Trader is easily my favorite of the 40k RPGs. It's the only one of the additions of the setting where you actually have a degree of freedom. Dark Heresy, you're working for the Inquisitor, who assigned you your missions. Deathwatch has given you missions from the command structure. Black Crusade, you're a pawn of the Dark Powers. Only War, you're a trooper in the massive cog of the Imperial Guard. In Rogue Trader, you get to decide where you go. You get to decide how to make your fortune and equip your ship. You are very much in control of the campaign. With the vast wealth available to your characters, you can be anything you could possibly want. You've got the best quality fighter craft, power armor built specifically for you. A massive array of weapons that will rip apart just about any enemy to shreds, either from a distance or close up. But the game is not a cakewalk. You are still a squishy human. Hit points are few in this game. They act more like a blade of armor. Nothing bad happens as long as your hit points are in the positive. Once you hit 0, things get rapidly worse. You will get blinded, lose limbs, have your face melted off before dying horribly in a graphic fashion. You can take a few hits from most basic ranged and melee weapons. The heavy weapons will turn you into so much of a smear they'll bury you in a shot glass. Weapons like the las cannon do so much damage, you're automatically dead just from the base damage. Then you roll 5d10 more damage to rub it in. Of course, then there's the multi-melta, my favorite. which vaporizes any armor you're wearing, and then kills you, then rolls for damage. And because it's a friendly weapon, it also melts everyone standing around you. I love the Melty Melta. It doesn't have the range of the las cannon, but at least you're guaranteed to see the look on their faces before you vaporize them. Rogue Trader has a plethora of enemies. You can build an entire campaign around just a single foe. There's Chaos Cultists, Orcs, Eldar, Dark Eldar, Kroot, rival Rogue Traders, the Rakghoul, and the Yuvoth, which are custom aliens created for this game. Even though the Yuvoth are still technically extinct, their machines keep going and keep killing people. So yeah, those guys are great. All of which can kill you in horrible ways. There's just a huge variety of subtypes in the different types of enemies. If you want to hunt orcs, you can spend the whole campaign gunning down boys and working your way up to the war bosses. If you want to fight something far more dangerous than any filthy xenos, fight for territory with the rogue traders. Rakghoul will try to destroy everything you hold dear, but at least they won't pretend to like you first. Large part of the game was a scavenger hunt for ship parts because of the Archaeotech components. You can build a massive fleet of ships or just one really awesome ship as you adventure. And by adventure, I mean storm rival ships and take them by force. There's a lot of ways to get new ships depending on your playstyle. If your profit factor is high enough, you can just purchase the smaller class of ships to grab up transports and escorts. If you're strong enough, you can salvage ships that you defeat in combat. For the exploring types, there's a lot of lost ships you claim in the Expanse of the Void. If you can't salvage the entire ship, you can at least grab parts of it. There's an ancient tech called Archaeotech, which is far superior than current technology. In the 40k universe, there was a time where technology was just better than the current science. That was called the Dark Age of Technology. Normally, Archaeotech is claimed by the Adeptus Mechanicus when it's discovered, but thanks to you being a rogue trader, the rule of dibs reigns supreme in 40k. So if you come across an old wrecked ship that is an Archaeotech engine, feel free to rip it out of the ship, then haul it back to your shipyard and install it in your ship. Suddenly you've got more power and space available, so you can add even more cool stuff like that Astrodome-sized shoe closet you've always wanted. Now for the downside. This game requires the players to show initiative. This is not a game that does railroading very well because you've got literally an army at your disposal and you can always pack up and leave on your city-leveling giant war machine currently in orbit above you. You have thousands of people under your command, or tens of thousands on the larger ships. There's some hand-waved laws explaining why the rogue trader has to be the part of the first boarding team to claim something, or others will just take it from you. Again, I cannot stress enough how important the law of dibs is to the Imperium of Man. Alright, so you can set up an entire adventure for your party, but you're going to have to make it fit what the party wants. A party with a Grand Cruiser is about as subtle as Exterminatus, that's not going to go for a stealth exploration game. Throwing a crew with a scout sloop into an extended land battle is a good way for them to lose interest in the game. The game doesn't do written adventures very well unless you dangle a lot of opportunity right in front of them. If you dangle too much opportunity, they're going to go off the rails. Greed isn't good in Rogue Trader, greed is king. If you give them enough of a prize, they will chase it, but they will chase it in different ways. If your players don't like sandbox games, they will hate Rogue Trader. It requires a lot of room to work with, but if they don't know what to do, they aren't going to have a good time. On a side note, seriously, who in Fantasy Flight games thought the players were just going to let that battleship get away in the first adventure book that they wrote? I mean, seriously, you walk in, you get to the mad captain, he says he wants to send his battleship off into the void and save the crew and let them die like actual voidfarers, and you're talking to a rogue trader who is already pricing out the different parts of the battleship. No, that's not going to happen. I've run that adventure for 5 different crews, and every one of the crews shot the captain and kept the battleship. Come on, guys. If you want to get Rogue Trader, get ready to shell out some cash. It was never a cheap game to begin with, and when Fantasy Flight lost the 40k license, the vultures took over. It's not uncommon to find the core book for over $100. Most of the supplements range north of triple digits as well. You can find the adventures easily enough. They weren't very good to begin with the exception of Frozen Reaches. I liked that one. If you want Battlefleet Coronis, Into the Storm, or Faith and Corn, you're going to be spending some serious cash unless you're patient enough on eBay or the Facebook auctions to catch one for a decent price. The sad thing is most of the expansions add to the game exponentially. You're going to want them. Battlefleet Coronis gives you a ton of options you can build your fleet with. Into the Storm gives you so many options it's almost mandatory. The Navis Primer completes the Astropath and Navigator classes. Grab the whole set if you can, but watch the prices, because if you just buy them for what they're wanting, you're going to be spending $1,000 for not many books. And it's not a very large print run of books, fortunately, so you don't have to buy many of them. Rogue Trader was showing cracks when the line ended. The original system hadn't aged well with the strict class limits on skills and talents. Black Crusade, Only War, and Dark Heresy 2nd Edition had switched to a new system which was much less restrictive and open. Now, the more in common you had with a category of an advancement, the cheaper it became for you. This would have probably breathed a lot more life into Rogue Trader. Sadly, the game died with the rest of the 40k world when the license got yanked. There was 2 books in the works, a Tau source book and an adventure involving the Tau. These were full-size books in color that never made it to print. They did make them free to download, so snatch them up as soon as you finish watching this. I'll see if I can link the straight link to the books. No kidding, they're fantastic, and you can use the Tau book for Only War or Deathwatch if you want to play a Tau in those lines. So that's it for Rogue Trader. It was one of the most open games you'll ever see. You decide how you're going to play it, how you're going to go plunder, colonize, and wage war to improve your finances. The more books you add to the game, the more dangerous it becomes, because the more rolls you make, the more chances you're going to fail, and failing in this game usually has serious penalties. If you like to read about 40k, some of the fluff books are fantastic reads. Unfortunately, the secondary market has made this a very difficult game to find. Are you tired of being cooped up all day, watching the press work themselves into a tizzy? Just need to take it out on somebody? Well, in this Mad Musings, why not turn yourself into a genetically engineered killing machine and rack up a body count that Doom Guy would get envious of? I'm looking at the third of the Fantasy Flight 40k games, Deathwatch. So bless your bolter and set your chainsword to mulch. I'm Mr. Welch, and it's time to honor the chapter. Deathwatch, without question, is the high end of the 40k power scale when it comes to dealing with the RPGs. First level Deathwatch characters are as powerful as maximum level Dark Heresy characters. Short of heavy weapons and lucky hits, a single Space Marine is going to wipe the floor with any party from any of the other 40k RPGs. Playing Deathwatch is like putting Doom on God mode and wiping the floor with every demon in hell. Might not make great role-playing, but it does make for fantastic catharsis. Everything in Deathwatch is more powerful than anything previous versions of the game have ever seen. The Astartes bolter was so powerful they had to nerf it in the early errata because it was better than the plasma and the multi-guns, which just wasn't right. This is the basic bolter for a Space Marine. That was about the same damage as a heavy bolter for a Rogue Trader. Then, just for building a Marine, first off you get all the Space Marine stock abilities, and there's a ton of them. There were so many, the character sheet includes a cheat sheet so you don't forget you can spit acid, that you gain new skills from cannibalizing dead enemies. You can enter suspended animation, you gain resistances to drowning, poisons, and toxins, and a dozen other abilities that make you immensely powerful before you've rolled a single die to generate a characteristic. For the stats, you get all the normal abilities from the other 40k RPGs. However, you do start with a much higher stat than Rogue Traders, the next highest tier level on the 40k RPG ladder. You also gain superhuman strength and toughness. Then you put on the power armor and they go up even higher. Your starting equipment would be enough to solo most adventures built for Dark Heresy or Rogue Trader, only there's a whole party of you. When dealing with large numbers of mooks, you don't roll to see if you hit, you roll to see what percentage of them you kill. Welcome to the top of the food chain. Building a character is fairly simple. Roll 2d10 for every stat, add them together, assign them where you want, and add 30 to every roll. On average, you're going to have double the stats of a regular human. You get a ton of bonus skills and abilities as you are playing an experienced Marine, not some fresh out of the scout training acolyte. Then you pick your chapter from the 6 in the main book, or grab any of the other chapters from the future expansions. The chapter you pick gives you even more abilities. Select your specialty from Tactical, Devastator, Assault, Librarian, Tech Marine, or Apothecary. Those give you more abilities. Then finally add the Deathwatch template, and those give you more abilities. So when you're finished adding all your bonuses, you are one of the Emperor's Angels of Death. The basic concept of Deathwatch Marines is you are a mix of various chapters that have been seconded to work for the Inquisition to put down the threats of the filthy xenos. Everyone gets their armor painted black except for your chapter badges, and now you're working for the Inquisition. Doesn't matter what chapter you work for, be it the uppity Ultramarines, the whiny Blood Angels, uptight Dark Angels, Viking frat boy Space Wolves, or if you look on some of the Deathwatch fan sites, you can take chapters like the Archaeotect-obsessed Scions of Ganymede, the vehicular-based chapter, the Steel Dragoons, or the brave but extremely dangerous Screaming Geckos. And yes, those were actually a chapter. It was an April Fool's Day story in a very old White Dwarf, but they have rules in Deathwatch on some fan sites. Somewhere. Once you've assembled your team, they send you out to investigate filthy xenos. By investigate, they mean shoot a lot and find their plans somewhere on the Jackson Pollock hamburger casserole that once was their body. Deathwatch has been criticized for not being very role-playing heavy, but you're playing a genetically designed killing machine that knows no fear, shows no mercy, and accepts no surrender. If you're not power gaming in Adeptus Astartes, you're not trying hard enough. More than any other 40k RPG, Deathwatch is about combat. You start off as one of the most powerful possible characters in any of the 40k RPG lines, and then you add skills and abilities. Buck naked, you shrug off small arms fire. While rogue traders have to search for their best quality bolt pistol and Dark Heresy acolytes can only dream of them, those are your starting weapons, the ones you upgrade from. Then you get grenades that start blowing acolytes to shreds. With the right gear you can fist fight armored vehicles and win. Most of the adventures is searching for the bad guys and then killing them, and the faster you search, the sooner you get to the good part, which is killing them. Speaking about the combat of Deathwatch, your players are going to get bored because they are so good. They aim to shoot with their bolter and the target turns into an overpressurized sausage. Remember, bolter shells explode from the inside of the target. So your players are going to ramp up the difficulty all by themselves. I'm talking about charging into melee combat with hundreds of Hormigans armed only with frag grenades, and unlimited grenades are just a single requisition point. I've seen players force-feed Hive Tyrants Meltabombs, suplex lictors, or use his combat knife to field dress a Tau Ethereal like he was a deer in the middle of a firefight. And you know what? My players had a blast. Because the threat of death wasn't lingering over them like previous 40k games, so they got to cut loose. Most games, everybody starts off trying to play their favorite chapter as close as possible to the lore. 3 games later, they're trying to recreate their favorite Mortal Kombat fatality on the Orc War Boss. The setting for Deathwatch is the Jericho Reach. It's a section of space that has just opened up after centuries of horrific warp storms. The region was reached by using a warp gate that lets the Imperium of Man's vast numbers of ships and troops into a region untouched by their armies or their missionaries. Initially, the conquest was going swimmingly, but unfortunately the Crusade hit a wall when the leader of the Crusade was lost to the warp. Then the filthy xenos started counterattacking as well as Chaos Traders. Now the Crusade is tied up fighting Tyranids, Tau, and Chaos, while the leadership of the Crusade ranges from desperate to insane. This is where the Space Marines find themselves, torn between doing their jobs and dealing with the squabbling politics of the Imperial commanders. Just because Commander Ebengrave is standing in your way while you are dealing with those filthy xenos, you can't just squash his head like a cherry tomato between your thumb and forefinger, even if you totally could, at level 1. The game itself is open to all sorts of ways to play it. If you want to play an entire team of uptype Dark Angels searching for their fallen, easily done. Take the Deathwatch out of this sector, put it anywhere else you want to keep it fighting. You can overlap this game with Only War with only some slight modifications. All you have to do to make this a chapter-specific game is to remove the Deathwatch skill chart from the start. This game is great for one-shot adventures. Here's your enemy, here's your war gear, go make the Emperor proud. Those are half the adventures right there. Missions can be as complicated as investigate and remove the Alpha Legion influence on this war zone. To see that Hive Tyrant over there? He's annoying my dog. Remove him. One caveat, though. Deathwatch does not do crossovers very well. It doesn't matter if you want to cross over a Space Marine with your Dark Heresy investigation, or you have a Space Marine on your Rogue Trader vessel helping you out. Marines are overpowered killing machines. Inside their own system, it's not a problem because there's a lot of overpowered stuff that they're trying to kill. But in Dark Heresy, you're going to have a hard time finding villains that can threaten a Space Marine. Rogue Traders might be the second most powerful characters in the 40k RPG, but remember, it's a really steep drop after number 1. There are a ton of background books for Deathwatch. If you're a 40k fan, you're going to want all of them for the fluff alone. Each of these books is made with an insane amount of art and detail. Several of the books are about new Space Marine chapters, including the rest of the founding chapters and first founding, new equipment and specializations, as well as the Imperial Fists and Rites of Battle, and a book detailing little-known Space Marine chapters in honor of the chapter, including a chapter generation chart. There's several books detailing the various planets in the war zone itself, as well as a book on the filthy xenos, including one on the Necrons. Bear in mind what constitutes a difficult challenge for Astartes is a TPK in every other game. So be warned, there are things that can hurt a Space Marine, but the Astartes can hurt them back just as easily. You do have to level up to get your better skills and abilities, and you also have to earn reputation points to gain better gear. The Tech Marine isn't going to give you a melt-a-gun if you ask nicely. You've got to impress him enough that he decides that you're worthy. Because of this, there's a lot of daring deeds that will be attempted in Deathwatch to gain the favor of your battle brothers and earn the respect of the people that give you better gear or specific missions. This causes a lot of good-natured one-upmanships. It also gets people trying to solo Orc War Bosses and Tyranid Carnifexes for extra honor. That's probably the most common way you end up rolling a new character. If you want to start collecting Deathwatch, get that stimulus check ready because these books are in great demand. They weren't cheap to begin with, and with Fantasy Flight Games losing the 40k license, the prices have gone up 50% or more on the second-hand market. The problem is Deathwatch is a very well-written and very well-designed game. People love these books, and that makes a full set cost nearly $1,000 easily. Aside from just the adventure books, these books are going to reach up to about $100 on eBay and Amazon, and a lot more because some people think they're made out of gold, obviously. You just have to be careful and patient and keep an eye out for the ones that get put up on auction and hope you can snag them for a cheap price. And cheap is probably anything under $75. Now, having heaped all the praise on Deathwatch, let me add this. Deathwatch isn't for everyone. It's a very one-note game. But if you just want to cut loose with a nigh unstoppable killing machine, if just for an evening, and not worry too much about making friends with filthy xenos, the game has a charm to it. Deathwatch games tend to be light-hearted fun because there are numerous rules exploits that add to the overall carnage. Normally this is a bad thing for RPGs, but for Space Marines it's actually a mark of honor to kill someone in such a way that people talk about the brutality of the death for decades or centuries. Seriously, there's a point system. Time for a new Mad Musings, and also to finish off the Fantasy Flight Games run of 40k products. Today we're looking at the fourth game in the series, Black Crusade. This one's a bit of a mixed bag, as it revised the core system with its mechanics, something that future releases would adhere to, but it was also the only one that restricted itself in playstyle as you were playing Agents of Chaos, making crossovers with the other 4 games almost impossible. Throw in the game's split focus on cultists versus Space Marines, and you get a game with a narrow scope and an uncertain premise. I'm Mr. Welch, and let's be bad guys. Black Crusade debuted in 2011, fourth in the release schedule between Deathwatch and Only War. It was a major diversion from the previous books. Not only were you playing the bad guys, but the game largely did away with the previous class level system from the first 3 games. The game also presents 2 playable options, Chaos Space Marines and Chaos Cultists. This causes a bit of a power imbalance that can't be rectified, as there's no way a cultist is ever going to rise to the power of a starting Space Marine. Mixing the 2 in a single campaign is a good way to destroy it. Instead, you have to design the party around one or the other. Sam Stewart was the lead game designer, and the list of artists is longer than my arm. Keeping in the style of Fantasy Flight, the art is top-notch. That is something that they never skimped on. The ultimate goal of Black Crusade is to become a Demon Prince. You do this by raising your infamy score to a specified amount. If successful, you change from your mortal form to a demonic form and go off having all sorts of demonic fun, though it does take you out of the campaign. However, if your corruption hits 100 before you max out your infamy, instead you turn into a Chaos Spawn, mindless, shapeless, and having the constant urge to scream despite having no mouth. In either case, your character is done. The game comes in with a built-in timer. The players will either die, mutate, or ascend. There's no other options. The mechanics that Black Crusade introduced move completely away from the classes, though it does have starting templates for every player. Unlike previous games, the skills and talents are not restricted by class. Instead, the price for every advancement depends entirely on your alignment to the Chaos Gods. An acolyte sworn to Khorne, the demon lord of war, slaughter, and Swedish death metal album covers, gets a deep discount on all abilities that help him slaughter people in geysers of blood. Conversely, abilities tied to Slaanesh, Demon Prince of Excess, Pleasure, and Hollywood executives, are more expensive for the Khornite acolyte. You don't have to follow the suggested path for your character in terms of building your abilities. It's just much cheaper if you do. So now you have your Chaos Space Marine or Evil Cultist, and you're ready to go take on the forces of the Imperium and start up your own Black Crusade. Or you would if the rules allowed it. Unfortunately, the selection of people you can actually fight from the Imperium is less than 10 in the main book. The game expects you to be fighting other agents of chaos to try to rise in the ranks of the corrupted, and more importantly, the eyes of the Chaos Gods. If you truly want to war against the Imperial Guard, Inquisitors, or Space Marines, you need to go out and get books from other game lines. While they don't match up perfectly to Black Crusade's updated rules, they're close enough. The only exception to that is Only War, which did use Black Crusade's new rules patterns. The game is set largely in the Screaming Vortex, a gathering of worlds trapped in a roiling warp storm forever cut off from the Imperium. These worlds are filled with all manners of unspeakable horrors and mind-shattering impossibilities, or as the player characters call it, home. The worlds are described briefly in the main book, and many of them get a much larger spotlight in the various splat books. Here you will find worlds comprised entirely of flesh, eternal war, hyper-advanced societies that use souls for coins, or where the laws of reality change day to day. There's a lot of places to die in the Screaming Vortex, but some of them are more inviting than others. One problem game masters will find running Black Crusade is the treacherous nature of the game. Take the constant backstabbing of paranoia, but then play it completely straight. That's the classic problem of running an evil game. Everyone is in it for themselves. That's the nature of chaos. There is no cooperation between the various factions unless somehow there's a direct benefit for them. This falls to the player characters as well, aggravated by the alliances to the dark powers that are mandatory for most of the party. Finding an artifact of great power that would help the party, instead, often leads to a near TPK as the strongest claim it for themselves, and the final owner is the survivor of the contest. Black Crusade is good for a lark, especially for people who have been playing the other 40k games and want to try the black hat on for a while. Not that playing Agents of the Inquisition or Rogue Traders are remotely squeaky clean. The game has a built-in finish line. You aren't playing long campaigns for Black Crusade. Even if you ignore the corruption and infamy trackers, the cutthroat nature of the setting makes sure players aren't long for this game. Black Crusade is easily the deadliest of the 40k line of RPGs. And that's saying a lot, considering this series includes Dark Heresy and Only War. Still, some people swear by this game, with the lethality being its best feature. If you're a 40k enthusiast and can't get enough background on the dark future, you're going to want to get Black Crusade. Fantasy Flight's 40k line in terms of quality is second to none, and Black Crusade is no exception. The books are packed with gorgeous art, if not a bit unsettling in this case. The background information found in every book is worth it just for the read for most 40k players. Considering most of the information in the books has been adopted as official canon by GW, it's good to get it straight from the source. These books are some of the only ones to detail life as minions of chaos in great detail, which just increases their popularity among collectors. Black Crusade does suffer the same problem as Deathwatch does, with Space Marines dominating play compared to Acolytes. Chaos Space Marines do get less starting skills, but they're superior in every other way. They have better stats, unnatural strength, and durability, a whole host of additional powers from their implants. They have double the wounds of Acolytes on average. Before you start a campaign, you have to decide if you want to go with the low-powered Acolyte campaign or the almost cartoonish Space Marine Crusade. Space Marines are great if you want players to cut loose and just blow through hordes without slowing down, but remember they suck at just about everything else that isn't killing things. Collecting Black Crusade is both easy and difficult depending on what books you're looking for. It doesn't have a lot of books. It only has 6, which ties it with Only War for the fewest from the initial run. The problem is 2 of the books were underprinted and very difficult to find. The tomes of Fate and Decay are commonly found at list price. There wasn't a large demand for them. But the tomes of Blood and Excess never got a second print run, and they are very hard to find. Online, those 2 will go for hundreds of dollars. So again, it's a mixed bag. You've only got 6 books to collect, but those 2 will cost more than the rest of the books combined on average. Thus concludes Black Crusade. It's a diversion from the other 40k RPGs, one that doesn't offer the crossover potential that the other 4 do, unless you're scouring the other books for bad guys, as Black Crusade is the only setting that doesn't have a bestiary book. If you're a 40k collector, you will want the set. Otherwise, just pick it up if you can find it cheap. Military role-playing games are some of the hardest games to play because they have a problem with getting repetitive very quickly. Fortunately for the topic of this Mad Musings, Only War does have enough variety to avoid the repetition trap. The 5th and final 40k RPG by Fantasy Flight Games, Only War explores the world of the Imperial Guardsman better than any 40k supplement or even novel. The game also enjoys some well-written supplements that increases the options available with each expansion, which also keeps the game fresh. I'm Mr. Welch, and today we're looking at Only War, the Imperial Guard role-playing game. First up, let me state flat out that I am horribly biased towards the Imperial Guard because that was my army in 2nd edition. When they took the Blitzkrieg away in 3rd edition, I lost interest in the game, because what fun is playing the Imperial Guard if you can't crush a Badman under heavy tread? And then they called me daft when I went to a Games Day tournament using a kit-bashed Mogul Khmer and a whole host of Rough Riders backed by nothing but tanks. Then they called me cheesy. Then they called me a cheater. Then after I crushed 7 straight Eldar armies with the thunder of hooves and the roar of engines, despite the judge declaring walls impassable to cavalry and tanks, and then putting a wall across my entire deployment zone, and I still wiped the filthy, degenerate, pointy-eared defeat xenos scum on turn 3. The Imperial Guard will not be denied victory despite the best efforts of some traitorous xeno-loving heretic judge. But I digress. Only War puts the players on the front lines as a member of one of a large variety of Imperial Guard units. The options for your players to wage war against the enemies of the God Emperor are pretty staggering, and they will need to be discussed in depth in Session 0. If everybody wants to unleash holy fire on the green-skinned brutes that dare step foot on a planet owned by the Imperium of Man, except for that one guy who has his heart set on playing an elite stormtrooper, a compromise is going to be needed. If the player wants to play an existing regiment like the noble Praetorians, the rugged Valhallans, or the fierce Attillans, the rules are already written for you. However, if the party instead wants to use the exhaustive regiment creation rules to play something like the merciless Necromundan Spiders, the elite Decurion First and Foremost, or the mechanized Tyranid Vanguard, the players need to design their entire regiment. Session 0 is going to be all about the players making a lot of choices because the campaign isn't going to work unless everyone is on the same page. Building a regiment is a multi-step process. The players will need to determine what kind of regiment they're in. This requires input from the game master because some of these regiments are a lot easier to play than others. Not just for the players getting bored with their campaign, but some of these regiments are hard to work into a campaign. Starting out as a Baneblade crew is a very valid option, but since there are very few things that can threaten a Baneblade, the number of bad guys you're going to be facing is pretty limited unless you just constantly attack the players when they get out of the tank. Or in the opposite direction, while it might sound awesome to start with a vehicle recovery tank, you will run out of redneck garage jokes very quickly in your campaign before you realize every adventure is just boiling down to drive to a broken down tank and get it out before the enemies attack. Once you've picked your regiment and understood that rear echelon regiments like artillery or motor pool might sound great in theory but restrict your game options too severely, then you have to finish the rest of the regiment. This includes picking the commander, your gear, your training doctrines, any bonuses and flaws, and all the rest of the details. Again, this is going to require either the game master building the regiment himself or having the players decide the history and the details of their units together. The latter can be a great tool because the players are going to be members of a unit that they built themselves. Players do need to be open and honest with each other when they're making suggestions, so one player isn't pushing for an advancement that will just benefit him. Like the one player in our campaign who convinced the rest of the party that they really wanted the intelligence aptitude, so then he put his double-aught roll into intelligence and played an Ogren, and quickly and cheaply maxed out his intelligence ability, then got a bonehead advancement which gave him a good quality cerebral implant and making him one of the smartest characters in the campaign, which just wasn't right considering he was almost 10 feet tall and mostly cybernetic. On second thought, that was actually an awesome character, especially when he started taking all the intelligence skills and cybernetic advancements which boosted the intelligence skills. Then the rest of the party realized he had the highest intelligence of any of them, which got him promoted to captain, leading to the company being led by a surprisingly well-spoken space ogre. Come to think of it, I won't lie, Big Bad Bob was one of the best characters I've ever seen played in a role-playing game because of how ludicrous the initial concept was compared to how the actual character turned out. But once you've got your regiment created, then each player needs to choose their role inside the unit. Guardsman options include sergeants, medics, vehicle operators, heavy gunners, and weapon specialists. Weapon specialists are your stock guardsmen, and they get special access to weapons and ammunition. There are some specialists available who work with the unit but are outside the normal command structure. These include commissars, engine seers, priests, psychers, the elite stormtroopers, and the abhuman rattlings and ogrins. As their title suggests, these are hyper-specialized options that do one job very well, but tend to have problems outside their area of focus. You generally don't want multiples of the same specialist in the unit, as it can cause problems as they start to overlap each other in terms of use. And you certainly do not want two commissars watching over the same unit, unless you really like Mexican standoffs. Once the players have their characters, it's time to make their comrades. Each character gets a comrade, a bestie. There's a few exceptions with some of the specialists. The comrade is an NPC that serves as the character's comrade in arms, hence comrade. These can be given certain orders and generally give a mechanical benefit to the players while not being an actual combatant themselves. For example, if you give a shoot order, the comrade lays down suppressing fire, allowing you to hit easier. Comrades can be used as sacrificial characters to show the deadliness of a situation, or if a character bites it for any reason, then his or her comrade becomes the next player character. One aspect of Only War that makes the game interesting and allows for a degree of character improvement more than most military campaigns is the logistics system. Rather than the similar system in Death Guard, logistics in Only War aren't a sure thing. You can ask for a las cannon, artillery support, or carapace armor, but there's no guarantee you'll get any of it. Sometimes you'll get lucky and the character that asks for the near-unique piece of war gear rolls a 3. And other times the dice hate you, so when you ask for an easily attainable Chimera tank to drive you 10 miles to the advanced firebase, instead you have to hoof it. The more you ask for, the less likely it is you will get anything. Or worse, something you didn't even ask for. Granted, sometimes you can get something great like best quality rations. Sometimes it's absolutely useless, like getting 100 rounds of Hell's Halitosis ammunition, and you don't have a single one in the regiment. And other times it can be very dangerous, like a glowing box with the inquisitorial seal on it. Of course, the Munitorium doesn't make mistakes, so you better figure out how to use everything they send you. Only War's setting isn't anything earth-shaking like Deathwatch or Dark Heresy. It's simply putting down a rebel uprising on a random planet. No renegade ghost suns, no top-secret stargates, or adventures outside the light of the Astronomicon. Just a straight-up, go-down, fight heretics and the filthy xenos. The actual setting for Only War is its weakness, but it's a minor one because you can easily adjust the setting with any of the other books in the 40k line. Only War is compatible with the other RPGs in the 40k line, but there's going to be some minor tweaking because the rules are slightly different from some of the earlier ones like Dark Heresy. The more you vary the enemies, the better the players will enjoy the game. So go grab the Tau from Deathwatch, the Eldar from Rogue Trader, and scour all the different monster books from the previous games for every single bad guy you can find. If the players have too easy of a time, throw Chaos Space Marines at them or surprise them with a Rat Gull Assault from Rogue Trader. The players don't have to win every battle. In fact, a good storytelling method is to have the characters win every objective that they are sent, and the Imperium still loses. Nothing like having the players seize the objective and then get told to retreat because somebody else lost the battle for them. If you want to find a copy, remember it's a Fantasy Flight 40k RPG, which means you're going to pay a small fortune to acquire the books. The adventures are cheap enough, but you're not getting this game for the adventures. Most of the source books will run you a C note each, and remember, the more source books you get, the better this game gets. If you really want to play the game, you're going to have to keep an eye out on the various RPG auction sites or get lucky at a used bookstore. The game has a lot of possibilities, and if your players do want to play a Baneblade crew or decide that trying to change the oil on a Hellhound before the Eldar attack is interesting, you can run a one-shot. But if you want a campaign, the game gives you all sorts of options on how to proceed. Guten Tag, Vatos, to one of the most venerated fantasy RPGs of all time, and the one with the most fractured base. I'm talking Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, the game that lets you play out your favorite bits of Games Workshop's famous wargame, only spending hundreds of dollars on the books instead of thousands of dollars on the miniatures, where you can play the part of any number of regular people of the old world, facing off some of the worst creatures chaos can throw at you, and some of them you might be able to even kill. Like when you take your Wood Elf Warband to the tournament and draw a Chaos Dwarf army in the first round. This game doesn't even try to be fair. I'm Mr. Welch, and today I'm sharing the Gospel of Hashut and the other lesser Chaos Gods. Warhammer was first published in 1986 by Games Workshop itself, back when they made their own RPGs. The game was very well received and still holds up today, but it wasn't profitable, so it was discontinued. That would be it, except Hogshead Publishing in England and Nexus Editress in Italy asked to license the old game and expand on it, and that brought it back to public view, even winning awards for their adaptions. The game itself was written by a host of well-established British game designers, including Rick Priestley, Graham Davis, Jim Bambra, Richard Hallowell, and Phil Gallagher. It presented a dark world of impending doom where monsters roam the countryside. Magic is almost as dangerous to the caster as the target, and anyone you know might be an evil cultist. The game is brutal in nature. The mechanics for 3 of the 4 editions used a percentile system with a template overlay style character creation. You start with a small number of playable races, human, elves, dwarves, and halflings to begin with. As I said, the game isn't balanced. Elves and dwarves are just better than humans. They get higher stats, better class options, and more skills. They also know this, and will lord it over humans every chance they get. One side effect is their screams often cause those with skill in medicine to become deaf, unable to hear the elf's cries for healing as they bleed out just feet from the people that they were mocking minutes before. I can't find that rule in the book anywhere, but it does seem to be followed by most human players. All the editions use the same stats, which are derived largely from the original wargame, with a few minor differences and additions. You've got weapon skill, ballistic skill, strength, toughness, and fellowship, among others. You roll these at random based on your race, with elves getting the most bonuses and halflings getting the fewest bonuses. Then you pick your starting class, which is like a template like warrior, rogue, or academic, at least in first edition. These give you a starting talent, and then you determine your career based on your class. Not all the careers are prestigious or even useful. Once you get your career, it modifies your characteristics and gives you some skills, and then your character is practically done. Each career has an advanced scheme telling you what you can learn from that career before you have to switch careers. Veteran adventurers will have numerous careers in their history. One core aspect of Warhammer that is present across all editions is that magic is very potent, but very dangerous. Magic draws from the realms of chaos, where the evil gods live and a whole host of demons accompany them. These gods are prophesied to destroy the world one day, in one of 2 very badly written world-ending events that bring about the destruction of all forces except chaos. Anything that tries to stop this oncoming storm of chaos will be defeated, often in the most implausible, eye-rolling, and hack-written way. But in the meantime, you can try to hold back the chaos, knowing that nothing you try or accomplish will stop the tides of chaos from killing everyone in the world. Unless, of course, you develop super rat powers, like you somehow crush everybody that opposes you with the magical power of being the writer's pet. The same writers that decided to let the players determine how the battle for the world would end, only for their chosen one to get crushed in competitive play, setting up the stupidest conclusion where he suddenly beats everybody who was kicking his teeth in moments beforehand, only to get sucker punched out of nowhere by a guy who had just been thoroughly routed prior in a previous battle. But hey, they ignored that timeline because the wrong players won, so they blew up the world the way they wanted to instead of letting the good guys actually win one for once. Sure, they irked almost all the fan base, killed off their game, and rendered probably millions of dollars of miniatures sitting on shelves moot, but at least they got their new edition out with brand new trademark-friendly versions of the same damn races. Where was I? Oh yeah, magic. So arcane magic is dangerous to cast, as chaos is not something mortals were meant to know. In first edition, this was largely just a warning and pure fluff. In second edition and later, there was a chance that a spell would go horribly wrong and bad things would happen to your wizard. The first edition magic system was a mana point system, but in later editions it was based off your magic level. If you rolled badly, then you suffer on the bad magic chart. You can still succeed and have a bad magic result. The results go from trivial all the way to just eaten. You have been warned. Combat is meant to be deadly. You have few wounds, and armor is often little more than cosmetic. Monsters are rated from nuisance to tough to TPK. You aren't expected to survive a battle with a dragon, much less put up a fight. The most common foes are going to be of the human or animal variety. Even knowing about monsters like Skaven or Chaos Worshippers can be hazardous to characters' health. The low power is largely in part because the characters are regular people thrust into a life of adventure. A beggar doesn't decide to pick up a sword and start killing monsters for profit. More than likely, a Skaven thought he was tasty, and the beggar had to beat it to death with a brick, making him the most experienced Skaven slayer in the entire village. Some careers are devoted to combat or magic, but players can't be sure they will start with those careers. Once the players have put down a few bandits or cleared the forest of wolves, they might try to head out and find more challenging creatures to fight. The game includes the entire run of Warhammer's rogue gallery, from undead to Skaven to orcs to chaos to dark elves, and even the fierce but underappreciated chaos dwarves. Most of the time you're going to be playing inside the Empire, so you're going to be the fantasy equivalent of members of the Holy Roman Empire. It's a huge nation, but a lot of villains are regional, so you have to figure out why the dark elves across the ocean are there to threaten players. And it's very unlikely that the players are going to head across thousands of miles of wasteland to gaze upon the technological marvels in Zarna Grund. And of course the problem with chaos is some of their monsters, especially the demons, are quite deadly, and even the mid-tier demons like Beasts of Nurgles or Juggernauts of Khorne will tear apart a party easily. Be very careful balancing these encounters. This isn't 5th edition D&D. Players can actually lose here. Most campaigns will focus on fighting a single type of foe, which is fine because there's a huge variety of bad guys of each type. The Vampire Counts of Sylvania are always a great bad guy, with loads of low-level undead backed up by a vampire at higher levels. Players can scythe through Skaven until they get to the Assassins or the Mad Warp Priests. Orcs love to fight, and there's a host of greenskins ready to go. If it's in the wargame, it's in the RPG. Even the Chaos Dwarves, even after they stop supporting them and wish they would have gone away, even to the point of rigging tournaments to prevent Chaos Dwarf players from winning using the rules you wrote and the miniatures you created. Making tournament rules that specifically punish the army because their selection wasn't as expansive as Chaos or Empire. So when somebody takes their 10,000 points of DWARVES down to Games Day and proceeds to rip through 6 different armies like they were made out of balsa wood and sits alone at the top of the leaderboard by a massive margin, only for the judge to zero out scores for army comp and painting because he didn't like your army, so the player drops from 1st place to 17th place with no chance of an appeal because of the subjective part of the tourney allowed judges to prevent anyone they wanted from winning without having to tell the person to their face they never had a chance of winning at all. 20 years later and I'm still bitter. 10,000 points of Chaos Dwarves sitting on that shelf. Where was I? 3rd edition. This is one of the most controversial versions of the game because the rights have been picked up by Fantasy Flight, who redesigned the system entirely, switching from a percentile-based system to a die pool system, using all custom dice with a system that would later be streamlined into their Star Wars RPG. 3rd edition was heavily criticized for several reasons. First, the starting box set was $100 retail. That made it the most expensive RPG in print at the time. Second, the gameplay was largely considered too complex, as the more you increased in power, the more the rules came into play. This complaint did have some merit, as the Star Wars system that evolved from it dropped a lot of the overly complicated mechanics, but still kept the overall dice system. Lastly, the game was said to be closer to a board game than an RPG, with tons of props, map sheets, and the mechanics playing more like Warhammer Quest to some people. Still, it was Fantasy Flight Games, and they're known for not skimping on high-quality products, even if they did kind of price themselves out of the market for a huge number of players. While the negatives of 3rd edition are well known, so are its strengths. Players were rewarded for cooperative play, with special abilities unlocked when the characters worked together. It was designed for party play. Lone wolf characters were at a serious disadvantage compared to team players. The storyteller die was another major strength of the system, where this adventure would often throw the players for a loop as the story branched out in an unexpected direction on the roll of a die, similar to the wild die system from Star Wars D6, only with a better written mechanic behind it. Again, the better parts of the Warhammer system were later adopted into the Star Wars RPG. The third edition is a collector's item now, as prices on the second-hand market for Warhammer Fantasy Flight products have gone insane in the last few years. Cubicle 7 got the rights to Warhammer after GW ripped them from Fantasy Flight and promptly gave us 4th edition. It keeps the down-to-earth approach to the game from 1st and 2nd. The characters aren't adventurers full-time. They have jobs that occasionally require them to kill monsters. The imbalance between the races is still there, though humans are given more fate points to balance it out, making them harder to kill and luckier overall. They've also revamped the career system, as you can move on to advanced versions of careers once you complete the schemes, instead of just jumping to the next career in line. Combat was changed to a more fluid approach with the possibility to parry and riposte, as compared to the U-swing, I-swing method from previous editions. People are torn on 4th edition. It has some good points, and it changes some things people preferred from past editions. But its biggest advantage is it's still in print, at least until GW blows up the game world and makes Age of Sigmar mandatory. Warhammer Fantasy was a game loved for its lethality and brutality. Its critical hit system won over a lot of adolescents with its graphic description of what happens when you hit someone who's already low on hit points. It's not a game you get too attached to your character over. You are one bad hit away from making a new one. Instead of the farm boy that picked up a sword that decided to stab kobolds for fame and glory, you're a rat catcher that got really good at killing the really big rats, to the point you could advertise your skills as a master rat catcher. It humanizes the characters, making them feel like they were part of the world, where they weren't born to greatness, but they had to seize it themselves. Buying the game is easy unless you're looking for the Fantasy Flight 3rd edition or the original GW hardbacks, all of which are collector's items. The other editions are either POD or easy to find on the second-hand market, with 4th edition again still in print. 2nd edition is probably the most popular of the older editions, as they captured the game at its height, and the source books covered all aspects of the setting. Plus it has the most comprehensive rules for the Chaos Dwarves.